Right, thank you. We'll continue on to the next item, which is titled Child Sexual Abuse, and Domestic Abuse. And again, this is under the overall section within the Police and Crime Plan around safeguarding vulnerable people. Just by way of introduction, there's a multitude of work that does go on in this area, and again I appreciate there is a lot of information to cover, but recent or fairly recent developments have been the establishment of a domestic abuse board, which brings together not only West Yorkshire Police but all our partner organisations. Obviously Stuart is here as our dedicated safeguarding advisor from this office, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and certainly good news fairly recently that the HMIC FRS, the people that inspect the police service, did rate West Yorkshire Police as good in this area around being effective, efficient and legitimate in keeping people safe. And also, just to note, of recent years commissioned more what are called ISVA services, Independent Sexual Violence Advisors, who clearly work with victims and looking at also in developing our Sexual Assault Referral Centre to cover more services which are required given the number of incidents and demand that we have in West Yorkshire. And also, pleased to say, I mentioned about the Safer Communities Fund earlier. Actually 68 projects have been funded through that, which totals more than £300,000 since 2014. And again, just demonstrates the demand that's out there amongst many sort of locally based groups doing some good work at the very local level in supporting victims and raising awareness around these sorts of issues. So that's just a very brief update from me by way of background, and now I'll hand over to yourselves to give an update. Thanks.
Well, Commissioner, as you know, certainly during the course of the last 3 years, there's been a real sharp focus around vulnerability, which includes obviously child sexual abuse, and also domestic abuse. And again, these are clear priorities falling out of the Police and Crime Plan, but also the Force's strategic assessment. And we have seen increases in volume which are associated around our improvements around crime data integrity, proactive media campaigns to improve awareness and encourage victims to come forward, but also enhancing the confidence of victims who have seen individuals convicted of these particular crimes, which has also contributed towards obviously raising awareness. And as a consequence, we've seen a significant increase in reports of non-recent offences, which clearly then has an impact on the crimes which we record today. So that's the particular threat to us around these particular crime types at this moment in time. As you're aware, we've got the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. That again has seen individuals come forward where we've recorded crimes, investigated crimes and pursued perpetrators. And we continue with a number of investigations, particularly around child sexual exploitation, around domestic abuse and also sexual offences as well. So if I can ask Darren just to go into the operational detail around child sexual abuse itself, but also domestic abuse as well.
Thank you. So it's almost a year to this month actually since they changed the national definition of child sexual exploitation, and we introduced 3 caveats on the back of that because we were conscious of the fact that under the old definition, and certainly under the new definition, it could introduce a whole host of offences where actually those might actually not be those aggravated commercials, not like coordinated offences of child sexual exploitation. So those 3 caveats that we introduced was around the interfamiliar setting within the family home, where there was no suggestion of organised criminality or commercial exploitation. sexual exploitation between two children who might be age appropriate to have those engagements. We're very conscious about the criminalisation of those individuals and not having those children being put under the banner of child sexual exploitation. And sexting, which, to give it its correct terminology, is youth-produced sexual imagery. So that where children again are sharing images between each other, which again is quite a demand for us. As Mr. Foster alluded to, we do have a number of investigations ongoing across all the 5 policing districts, and some of those actually may be singular offences where we have one offender with one victim, but we also have a number of cases ongoing that have multiple victims and multiple offenders which are also being investigated, which does create significant demand in terms of resourcing for those policing districts who do have some fantastic staff within those departments who do best to try and address those issues. All very, very complex, all very demanding just by the very nature of the offences. So moving on, I'll come on to the ongoing working developments to address some of these issues. So sexual abuse, now, as you mentioned, Commissioner, around the referral pathways to visitor service, that seems to have been embedded now, and we are seeing some positive outcomes of that. Really innovative, we have the dedicated child ISVA now, which is working within the safeguarding units. We've got ISVAs co-located within 3 of the policing districts, so Bradford, Caldervale and Kirk Police have dedicated resources within them. We're looking to expand that with the 2 policing districts. We continue to provide training for frontline officers, particularly those specially trained officers who actually become the first port of call when we're addressing those. So we see that's a real important issue, and we monitor that on a regular basis, ensuring that every single shift, every single team has a specialist trained officer available at all times, 24/7, 365 days a year. So should that offence be reported, we have the most appropriate resource to go to that particular incident, and that's really important. So we monitor that on an ongoing basis, and we've got further training later on this year for more officers to undergo that. We've managed to get onto the rape scrutiny panel, which previously we weren't invited to that, and that was something that the CPS held. So part of the governance unit, through negotiation, we thought it was really vital that we had a chair of that particular wanting to learn from any sort of key issues with cases that were being exploited, being reviewed, and see the good practice and actually areas where we could actually improve the service to survivors and victims of serious sexual offences. So moving on to domestic abuse, domestic abuse does create a significant demand. It's 10%, approximately 10% of our overall demand, and it's continuing to rise. Looking at the increase from previous years, we've seen a 12.7% increase based upon the previous years, and those continue to rise. Looking at sort of key elements from the domestic abuse, one of the things that we have pushed with Stuart from the Police Crime Commission's office as well is around ensuring that officers capture people who are at domestics, in particular children, and those trauma-informed officers who are attending those actually have an understanding of why is it so important that children's details are captured and what we can do to mitigate any future issues with those children. So that's increased to 30.7%, and that is a real positive that officers are now recognising the importance of getting those details down. We've had 183 coercive and controlling behaviour crimes recorded, and again that's a real positive, I think, that again officers are recognising that this is an offence. And I know Warren Stevenson made reference to that in his presentation, about the importance of domestic servitude and how that's important. And it's a great piece of legislation, and that we should continue to use. I'm hoping, I anticipate that will increase significantly over the next 12 months as well. Another success story, and I think this will continue to rise, and I'll come on to this a bit further on, but we've had domestic violence protection notices, 132 have been granted, and also the use of Clare's Law, which is the right to know, right to ask in respect of domestic abuse offenders, and that's been used 113 times. And again, I think this is an area where we could improve, and I expect that we will do, is around raising awareness around Clare's Law, and what again, a great piece of legislation that is for potential victims of domestic abuse to utilise. So again, it's that continual awareness raising around those key elements. So looking at some of the ongoing works, and as you can see from the report, it's quite detailed, so I'll just pick up some of the key headlines from there.
Yeah.
The National Working Group to Around Child Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse, the National Working Group, which we have a really good working relationship, have just recently launched the new assessment tool through the CSE strategic group, which Stuart co-chairs with Edwin Harrison, we're looking to develop that to inform West Yorkshire practices moving forward, because again, there's some academic research around that particular risk assessment tool, and we think that again will be a positive moving forward, assessing risk for victims. The use of civil prevention orders, obviously the changes to the Bail Act did cause us some issues around that preventative measures around potential offenders. And I think, again, the use of sexual harm prevention notices, etc., that we could use there to stop offenders from going on to commit further offences and putting restrictions in that aspect. We've also done quite an innovative piece of work with Professor Graham Hill around an offender destruction risk assessment tool. And again, this is something that we are leading on with West Midlands Police, which is actually doing a risk assessment on every single offender who comes to our notice, or potential offender, in relation to CSE and CSA. And that risk assessment tool will actually give us a suite of tactical options to consider based on a risk assessment score. And I think that is something that hopefully will build influence nationally around that piece of work. We have now got, in the process of, actually they're enforcing our dedicated case conference officers who will attend every single case conference within all the 5 policing districts, and that's again, it's been certainly enhance our involvement and investment in protecting young children and making decisions with our partners around that, so that is a real positive, is that. They're currently in training. Some are ex-police officers who come back who work within child protection, who are actually out doing some almost job training around child protection case conferences, so real positive with that. And the figures around our attendance in case conferences is around about 98%, which I think is excellent, and that's considered around certainly by the HMRC. We've continued with the CSE awareness input for our Year 7 students in Leeds, and again, that's been supported by Education Leeds, so we're very grateful for that. And we're well up to, I think, about 25, 26 sessions now, and that will continue as the school year continues. Victim care, obviously around sexual abuse, I know you're passionate about that, and you've had and certainly a significant investment, and so much so is the prospect of the new SAT building, which will hopefully certainly improve upon the facilities that we've got. Again, a really exciting development that for us. We also have a real active involvement in the Regional Sexual Offences Working Group, and that's supported by the Yorkshire Number of Forces, together with the scientific squad. CGES are also on that. And we're in the earlier stages of actually planning a conference in the summer of this year, which again, exactly this will give you further details on that.
Okay.
I'll come on to domestic abuse if I may now. I know you're fully aware of the whole systems approach, which you've also been actively involved in that, and that's come about as the violence against the women and girls. That obviously restarted in 2017 with three key elements really: is effective working in the criminal justice system, working with partners through the civil and court, and the multi-agency victim support offender management. And what has been a real success of this, and we are seeing some real tangible results from disclosures and victim feedback, is the introduction of the joint domestic cars with the IGVA service, so the Independent Domestic Abuse Violence Advisors, who are attending incidents when it's absolutely safe, almost immediately after the incident. And we are now seeing that, one, it's educating officers, seeing how other partner agencies are undertaking dash assessments. And we're actually seeing individuals making almost disclosures at the point of being present to from serious sexual offences and coercive and controlling behaviour. So we're getting great that victims have the confidence to make those disclosures, but also learning from officers to see how it can be done and improved upon. So that's going to continue now. Obviously, with the funding that's been granted, we're going to roll that out to all 5 policing districts. We'll have cover over the weekends. And that, to me, I think is brilliant. Actually, we are seeing some really good results. The course of controlling behaviour, which we pushed and pushed, obviously, Calderdale with the first district, policing district, and they got a fantastic result for a particularly nasty case in which an individual got 4 years, which was again the benefits of that, and that was recognised by officers, and they continue to go from strength to strength. The involvement of the Domestic Violence Protection Notice team, which will start very soon actually, and that will actually professionalise our delivery around domestic abuse protection notices. Again, this is giving officers the confidence to make more use of what is a great piece of legislation, again, around giving that respite for victims to actually make a decision whether they want to pursue any allegation, but also giving us the option to put some preventative measures in to stop offenders going on committing offences. So that will take place imminently. So just looking at the sort of strategic risk implications moving forward, we are sort of seeing a transition from on-street offending to more to cyber committing offences, and I think we will see an increase in the use of indecent images of children. I'm actively involved with Chief Constable Simon Bailey's office around developing processes and procedures and active involvement to stop offenders from committing. Our new campaign in the spring will be around indecent images of children, preventing people from going. We've already worked with the Lucy Faithfull Foundation and other local agencies around preventing people that's almost a tactic to stop people viewing those images of indecent children. The added effect on that is obviously we will see an increase in registered sex offenders moving forward, which have to be managed within prison districts. Again, the option to be what we call reactive management of those sex offenders will obviously take place depending upon the level of risk they present. The sexual offences, recorded crime continue to increase. It accounts for something around about 28% of all recorded sexual offences. The majority are rapes, but within the domestic setting are acquaintance related, rather than actually those being of a stranger nature. Domestic abuse, then we have seen an increase in the reported numbers, and again, that's, I think the confidence in there is feedback that we've got from the survey that we've done is actually, and I'll speak that a little bit, which I think is really important bit about this, is that 89% of people who have been surveyed said that they felt the police cared about them and would feel confident in contacting the police. And 86% were actually really satisfied with the whole police experience, which again I think is a success story, and I think in itself. But on the back of that, we have, through the recording purposes, we have seen an increase due to crime data integrity and systems change. In relation to the others, it does present as a risk around the service officer reduction in funding by the government, obviously does continue to pose a risk for us. We are looking at the review of the death assessment with the College of Policing. That is still awaited, and again, that we'll hope for to see that come out this year, fingers crossed. So, I'll pause the questions, is that okay?
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you. And it is a complex area, isn't it, to work through because of, as you say, the changing definitions. I'm sure it is confusing for the public around, the terms around child sexual exploitation, child sexual abuse, domestic violence. But clearly these are all things that we have to address as part of the proper recording of crime and incidents. So if you can just bear with me around some of the questions. So in relation to sexual abuse, do you feel that not only specialist officers but all police officers now have adequate knowledge of the new services in place provided by third parties, for example, such as SARC, the Sexual Assault Referral Centre, ISVAs, the Independent Sexual Violence Advocates, Rape Crisis, and others?
Yeah, I think this is an area that we will continue and we'll have to revisit all the time, if I'm being honest, because obviously with the new officers coming through the door, we're actively involved in training schools, so we take an active part in educating new officers to the organisation, as well new staff. So people going through the Customer Contact Centre, we will go and do some training with the Customer Contact Centre. We have now developed a safeguarding induction pack, which will hopefully become electronic, and officers will be able to have it on their handhelds, so we can actually make if you've got questions regarding this, it will hopefully direct into a particular area within the handheld devices. We currently got that on our intranet system where officers can actually, the police staff can actually go into and have a look to see if they've got any queries around what does this act, what do they do, what does NISBA do, what does ISBA do. So that's all in that induction pack. We're also doing that for new SLT members who actually undertake within safeguarding in the district level. So they understand what a serious case review is, what a domestic homicide review, and in fact to sit on those panels, what's their responsibilities within that, and how as a governance unit we can support their development, if you like. So that's something that we're actively involved with.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I accept it's an ongoing one, but one that hopefully helps to relieve some of the pressure on frontline officers knowing around what some of the other services are available. And just on that theme then, so what gaps or capacity issues do you feel exist in some of those wraparound services for victims? Especially, I'm interested in the sort of therapeutic support potentially available from the NHS, and have raised this, you know, certainly through the Criminal Justice and Mental Health Forum.
The therapeutic support is an issue for us, without a doubt. The service provision obviously does provide that emotional and practical support at the outset, really. And because of the waiting times for the therapeutic support, ultimately that falls back onto the service who end up picking up all that, and their workloads obviously increase as a result of that. So we continue to work with as NHS partners, but again it is a problem for us, and particularly for those involved in sexual abuse. That transition from a child to adult again is an issue for us.
Yeah. Something that perhaps you could help us with, to be fair, Commissioner.
Yeah, well, I certainly as we develop the Sexual Assault Referral Centre, there's the potential there, I feel, to look at wider services, including therapeutic counselling for obviously very vulnerable victims. So absolutely working with you to try and address that, and with partners in NHS and elsewhere as well.
So the one that's come up recently from district staff in terms of domestic abuses, that, you know, we've jointly commissioned services around victims, quite rightly, and we've jointly commissioned services now developing around perpetrator programmes. Then we need to look to the future about extending that category of victim to children who witness domestic abuse, and there's very little services out there at this moment in time for them. So we do the wraparound around domestic abuse coordinators and things. So I think we'd look to come to you on that, because the district staff are identifying that as a potential future gap.
Yeah, no, yeah, very happy to look at how we can take that forward. Yeah. Also, what steps do you think might need to be taken to increase reporting, especially from harder to reach groups, black, Asian, minority ethnic, LGBT communities, disabled people, and those with learning disabilities, for example?
Yeah, that is a really important issue for us, and I think it's something we do treat really seriously, and I think it was recognised by Man Health. I don't know who himself who went to the meeting, but there was a meeting recently with Man Healthcare, ourselves from the governance unit, New Central York was represented at a recent meeting where we actually undertook looking at how we can engage with those minority communities to actually come forward and to seek opportunities to find out actually what will encourage those communities without a voice really to come forward to, because we know that this is taking place, but how we can develop an easy mechanism for us to come forward and actually report to us, whether it's through community groups, etc. So that is ongoing, and certainly some part of our action plan moving forward to develop that as a key work stream.
Yeah, just to let you know, I'm certainly talking to groups who have got some potential proposals to try and address some of that in the Bradford area, but you know, obviously then looking at what we can do across the whole of West Yorkshire. So I can talk to you about that outside of this meeting. Just moving on then now to domestic abuse. How successful do you think the awareness raising campaigns conducted in October and just before Christmas have been?
Yeah, I thought it was excellent again. I think the timing was perfect. I've got some figures actually for you, which again, overall it reached 74,000 people who interacted on social media, which is phenomenal really when you think of that. it's around controlling coercive behaviour. You know, I think we have to be a little bit edgy sometimes in terms of trying to get people to come forward and to actually recognise, actually, I may be suffering some of these issues that you described in there, so I'll come forward. So I think it's been an excellent campaign, and obviously it featured heavily part of the safeguarding week, which was a very successful workshop.
Okay, thanks. Jane? Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick one, Darren. So you mentioned in the paper the number of investigations taken to CPS for consideration is decreasing, and the national work led by DCC Rolf.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you just give us an update on what came out of the last February event that took place?
Sorry, which event are you referring to?
So you said that there was a workshop held in February as part of the regional leads meeting and work ongoing with Louise Rolf to understand why.
Yes,
sorry.
The work there, obviously Cameron Norton represents West Yorkshire Police at that meeting, and obviously we're looking to see how it is the increase nationally around domestic abuse, which it is, and the volumes, and because we're seeing victim on victim, not being able to differentiate between who is a victim and who's not, and again there's discussions around that, saying, well, that may be for our decisions for CPS to take, actually looking at maybe opportunities around victimless prosecutions, the use of body-worn videos, is it really critical in that, and that's part of the work stream that will continue to develop. Particularly around body-worn, you know, which is a great bit of kit for us, I think, and a great evidence when presenting that in the court. Actually, if we can stop a victim having to go to court to give evidence, which is half the battle, then I think we will see our convictions and you know, offenders being brought to justice increase.
Thanks. And Dan, you talked about the use of domestic violence protection orders. What's your sort of view on the early learning and other plans to increase the use of them?
I think, yeah, I mean, I've touched on that in the report, and I think officers' awareness is increasing. There's no doubt about that. I think with the professionalising the team, which is basically, I think we'll see those increase significantly, and opportunities to use that piece of legislation should be at the forefront of officers dealing with every single case. So to that extent, we're wanting, or we are involved in training officers from a custody point of view. So when offenders are likely to be released from custody, the custody officer should be asking the question of the officer in the case, you know, around have we considered a DVPN or EDPO in this particular case. So it's continuing to raise the awareness around the officers. I think it was something when it was first introduced as quite a difficult piece of legislation, which in fact it wasn't, and making sure that the prohibitions that we put on these notices are appropriate and effective in terms of, one, securing and making sure the victim is actually safe, but actually preventing that offender from going back and committing further offences. So I think that will continue to increase, and I'm quite confident on that.
And then we can have a look and see whether or not that's had an impact on the repeat victimisation.
Yeah. Okay, and again, you touched on the use of the IDVA cars, and it's really just to, you know, you say that this is planned to be rolled out and further developed.
Yeah, it is, yeah. There's definitely green shoots there without a shadow of a doubt in respect to that. And I think out of all the forces that have been involved with this, I think we're the ones actually West Yorkshire are seeing the benefit of that. And we've sort of said, you know, extolled virtues of that, using that particular tactic. Other forces actually involved in that project are ringing victims up, and I think actually, you know, face-to-face contact with the victim is far more impactful. So we definitely West Yorkshire see as green shoots around victim disclosures and actually keeping victims safe, and actually on the back of that, more importantly, bringing offenders being brought to justice as a result of that.
But so did you say that this has been sort of deployed in the immediate aftermath of an incident?
Yes.
I know in Northumbria, for example, some of the crisis workers go out with the police to the
That's exactly it, Commissioner.
Yeah.
So the response officers will respond to an emergency incident. You might get a double crewed car going to deal with the ongoing violence or threat of violence. And at the same time, the independent domestic violence advocate will be driven to the scene to engage with the victim at the scene while the response officers are there.
Yeah.
So they are there, and it's now going across West Yorkshire.
Yeah.
So I think it's really positive.
But also there's that learning opportunity. I mean, Darren was alluding to making sure we obtain children's details. So the IDVA, who's the expert at attendance will have a better understanding of some of those signs and signals and things to look for. So there's a great learning opportunity there as well as dealing with the actual issue.
Yeah. No, that's good to hear. Thanks for that. Okay, and then just moving finally on to the CSE sort of area. So we've talked about the definition that has changed. Was it earlier last year now?
Yeah, it was New Year last year, 2017.
Yeah. How has that affected the recording of crime and police investigations, do you think, into CSE?
I don't think it's affected it at all, if I'm being honest. But the actual where we do get recorded does fluctuate due to the very nature of the crime. So we've not seen actually a significant increase in terms of CSE offences being reported to us.
So my understanding is we were ahead of the game in terms of we were recording a lot of things as CSEA already, and it was just a national change to try and bring the 43 forces in line.
The definition was quite long, convoluted and quite confusing, if I'm being honest, and then the revised definition, which was obviously underpinned by the work the University of Bedfordshire did, made it a lot more sensible and officers and easily more understood.
But again, you also said there's a 35% increase in the child sexual abuse reports into non-recent cases. Is this, do you think, expected to continue, and what implications do non-recent cases bring for investigations, and how are West Yorkshire Police managing such cases and supporting the victims?
I mean, the cases of them are very, very difficult in itself, and actually present challenges in terms of the investigation process, and also victim aftercare, support, etc. We do have a number of large CSE investigations that are ongoing in the increasing districts, which are resourced primarily by investigating officers, which you've invested in, and also the local safeguarding unit. So that does present a challenge in itself. What we've done to support that, myself and Chief Superintendent Mark Ridley do almost like a 3-monthly visit to those districts where those investigations are taking place. We do an overview review of that investigation. Mark Ridley from the head of crime and actually from the investigative point of view to support the senior investigating officer, but also the officers who are actually doing it day-to-day running that inquiry, and myself from a governance point of view to make sure that policy procedure is being adhered to in respect to one of the Crime Data Executive, which Mr. Bruns is very pleased about, and also making sure that policy procedures and the right appropriate flagging is being identified so that the necessary action can be taken should those offenders be brought come to a light in those other cases. So it is a really challenging area of business for us, and will continue to be. The better we become at so when we get offenders brought to justice, that in turn has an impact on other victims will naturally come forward as a consequence of that. So we are seeing that in some of those cases, and that's likely to continue, I think.
And as a result of that, we will have at times to take some professional judgment about how do we prioritise those investigations, which lines of investigation do we pursue, because at the heart of all of this is clearly wanting to be victim-centric, but we also want to make sure that offenders are no longer offending. And so, I know there's a lot of public interest at the moment, isn't there, in other matters, not least of which is the War Boys case. That highlights for me at what point do you actually draw a line and say this now needs to go to court, because apart from anything else, the victims are waiting. So it is quite problematic.
And that was one of the reasons. That was one of the reasons why we thought it was really crucial. We obviously linked in this issue around developing this risk assessment tool, because there was nothing national around offenders. How do we? It was almost just try and second guess based on intelligence. But if we can actually go out and risk assessment an offender, we can actually mitigate their threat by implementing civil orders or preventative warning letters, etc. around those individuals. So that's been done with some of our larger investigations.
Yeah.
And complicated by the nature of multiple victims, multiple offenders in some circumstances, but as you're aware, Op Ariel, Op Kellerabby saw significant sentences against the perpetrators, and commencing just today, there's Op Tendency, which emanated from the Kirklees district, which is in court this week, and for the duration over the summer up into the autumn. I think September is the indication when that might conclude.
Yeah, as you say, it is very topical at the moment, where, you know, I know it's slightly different, but it is connected in terms of the War Boys case, where there's a decision by the parole board, but clearly multiple sort of victims potentially who weren't or possibly weren't aware of that decision. And then there's been that other awful case recently where someone with a violent past has murdered his partner. So it was good to hear about the Clare's Law aspects that you are using here in West Yorkshire around somebody's past, if you like, and their partner's right to know, I guess.
Well, there was an article today in the Yorkshire Post around the right to ask and the right to know. There are some differences between forces within the region that we'll try and better understand, but there is some quite strict criteria that applies. The right to know is about us informing the victim. The right to ask is about an individual wanting to know whether or not they are at risk. And obviously there's, as I say, some quite strict criteria about what we can disclose, indeed if we've got any information at all.
Yeah.
And that's partly why you are getting some discrepancies across the country.
Yeah. Okay. And then, sorry, last one on this, but again, you touched on what's termed sort of sexual experimentation between children under the age of 18, where sexting, exchange of images, use of technology, etc., are excluded from being recorded as CSE cases, but obviously still of concern. Can you just say how you're dealing with those types of cases?
We're dealing with those on a case-by-case basis. I was fortunate enough to get them involved in developing the sort of process around sexting from how they use sexual imagery and how we deal with those individuals, because we were very conscious of the fact that we did not want to criminalise young people as part of this process, albeit whilst the crime has been committed, that can be recorded, we did not want to put them through the criminal justice system for obvious reasons, because it's not appropriate. And it's being able to define within those cases actually what is an aggravated offence, or actually what is children experimenting, and actually with no aggravating factors around that. So there is a process associated with those cases where officers can determine actually is this actually something more sinister, or is this actually children being children in effect and experimenting sexually as they get older. So that was really important. So we reviewed that. Safeguarding unit officers have been briefed on all of that, and obviously there's now a policy in place around those key elements.
Right. No, thanks for that. That's reassuring in terms of the approach that's been taken there. Okay, thanks so much. I know that's been quite a long one, but there's a lot of ground to cover under that particular one. But thank you for the work that yourself and West Yorkshire Police are undertaking with our partners, and obviously it's an area that we'll continue to monitor closely. Thank you.